So I think it's fair to say that my video yesterday where I was debunking common historical myths might have raised more questions than it actually answered, mostly from people going, hey, don't you just hit and run with your knowledge, get back here and explain yourself. So I thought that I would do that. And I'll do it with this myth, that Queen Victoria didn't believe that lesbians existed. Now, there were some people in the comments going, I've never even heard of that one. So I offer you proof that there is a myth. This is the AI response when I just put it into Google, just to establish the baseline that there is a myth, that this myth actually does exist. Right, okay, so now we can continue. So the story goes, and I'm not actually sure where the story comes from, by the way, if you do know, answer in the comments, but the story goes that in 1885, Queen Victoria took a line out of a criminal amendment act that was criminalising same-sex acts between men and women, and she took the detail out about women because she refused to believe that ladies could do such things. Now, just from a constitutional point of view, that is impossible because the monarch has to give assent to laws, and technically, they could veto something, but they can't just take bits out of acts. They can't just go through it line by line and go, I like that bit, but I don't like that bit. That doesn't happen. They either have to pass the entire bill or nothing at all. And no monarch has refused to pass an entire bill since Queen Anne in the 18th century. So she was not going to do that. She never had that kind of power. The chances are she probably didn't even read the bill in its entirety because she just sort of got summaries of what it was, and it passed through Parliament and now it was ready for her signature. It's more of an admin thing than any idea that she actually had the power to change the law by this point. But what was the act? Well, in 1885, the Criminal Law Amendment Act was passed, and this was a law that was all about the age of consent and trying to protect young girls from abuse and all kinds of good stuff, because the Victorians finally thought, maybe the age of consent should be a little bit older than 12, so they were trying to raise it to 16, all good stuff. This guy, Henry Lebauchet, was an MP who hated homosexuality, and he wedged in as a little amendment the criminalisation of any homosexual acts between men. Just wedged it in. Here it is. It's Amendment 11. Any male person who in public or private commits or is party to the commission of or procures or attempts to procure the commission by any male person of any act of gross indecency with another person shall be guilty of a misdemeanour and convicted thereof. And the next bit that you can be sentenced for up to 2 years hard labour. He was a wanker. We don't like him at all. But this is the act that actually was used to prosecute Alan Turing and Oscar Wilde. Now, the reason that Lebauchet has wedged this shitty little detail into the law is because until this point, what could be prosecuted under British law was the crime of sodomy, which had been on the books since that exemplar of sexual morality, Henry VIII, had passed laws criminalising it. Now, by the time we get to the 19th century, sodomy is an act. That's what it is. And in order to get a prosecution for it, you have to prove that that particular act occurred. That is not very easy to do if nobody is willing to give a confession, or there aren't any witnesses, or if everyone's just going, I really don't know what they're talking about. Well, you are, for want of a better word, buggered. Now, in 1870, a few years before that act was passed, there was an infamous case in Britain that kind of riled up a whole load of homophobia and was the seed of this Lebauchet Amendment Act going through. And that was the case of Frederick Park on the right and Ernest Bolton. Two young men who very openly enjoyed a homosexual lifestyle and loved dragging up on an evening and going out around London to pull men and to secure clients because they were into that kind of work too. Now, before you come at me, there isn't any evidence they actually identified as women. They lived their life as men, but they just enjoyed dragging up and as their alter egos in the evening, which attracted quite a lot of attention pretty quick, and they were arrested. But there was no evidence that they'd actually done anything. There were no laws that they could get them on. They tried to convict them for conspiracy to commit sodomy. That's a thought crime. How do you prove someone was conspiring to do that? The whole case fell apart and they got let off. And the establishment were furious because they didn't have any laws to get them on, which is why Lebauchet, when he saw his opportunity, passed this shitty law which just meant any kind of act that was deemed immoral was now criminalised between men. Now, why didn't it include women? That is a really good question, and it's one that historians do still debate because we're not entirely sure. Nobody wrote down, I am not including women in this act because ... But it is likely to do with sexual attitudes of the time. First of all, this pervasive idea that women didn't have as active and vibrant a sexuality as men did, so whatever they were doing, it couldn't have been as serious. And this idea that what women were doing didn't qualify as proper sex, proper intercourse. You still see echoes of this to this very day. Ask any lesbian and they will have encountered the prejudice at some time of somebody saying something stupid like, but what do you do together? Really, it's the act of penetration. This is a really phallocentric, patriarchal world, and they just can't properly conceive of how acts between women can count as what they're trying to legislate against, which is ridiculous. But that is why gay men have been prosecuted much more aggressively than women have, although women have been prosecuted and subject to horrendous treatment throughout history. But that doesn't mean lesbianism wasn't known about at the time. You have pioneering sexologists like Havelock Ellis who are publishing the first work where they're talking about same-sex desire. He called it inversion. But also throughout Victoria's reign, there was multiple cases like this, so-called female husbands. Now today, I suspect that we would call these cases of trans men, but in the 19th century, they didn't have that kind of vocabulary, so they just said female husbands. And these are almost always cases of men that have been living their lives, they've got married, they've had a happy wedded life, and then after they die and someone's done an autopsy, they've gone, oh my God, there are boobs and a vagina. And then it gets reported in the press as female husband. And there are loads of these cases. So the idea that Victoria, the Queen, wouldn't have been aware of this, no. Lesbianism has never been legislated against, not because Queen Victoria wasn't aware of it, she almost certainly was, but because it was never part of that Criminal Amendment Act in the first place, which is probably to do with Le Boucher's own fierce homophobia, and he was going after the men. That's what he wanted to criminalise. And lesbianism has never been illegal in the UK, but it isn't anything to do with Queen Victoria. It's almost certainly to do with homophobia and stupid men not being able to work out what women would do if they didn't have a dong between them. Hope that helps.